I really think the overall story of my life is someone who got to a point in life where I thought I had it all, thought I had achieved it all, and many people thought that about me. And yet when I looked inside, I really just saw a deep sense of emptiness, loneliness, and despair. I did grow up in a religious home. We were practitioners of our faith, and as a young kid, I just kind of tuned out and really didn't have much of an impact on me at all. I just felt like I was going through the motions. My parents actually took us as a family on a couple of occasions over to Elmbrook Church on a Sunday evening, and I'll never forget, the year was about 1974, and it was the first time I set foot in Elmbrook Church. But I wanted nothing to do with it. And that trend really kind of continued as I got into my high school years. Suddenly I became one of the popular ones, was one of the jocks, I was getting good grades, dated a cheerleader, really kind of had everything on the outside, but in the inside, found that there was an emptiness that I tried to find elsewhere. I was given an internship up in Washington, D.C., working on Capitol Hill. And I'll never forget when I came home that summer, really felt like I was on top of the world. I felt like I had been chasing and chasing and chasing. I had all of my dreams in my hands and suddenly felt that they were entirely empty. I never felt more empty in my life. Most of my friends and my family members had no idea about this despair, but it was there all along. So as always, I tried to medicate it through a lot of drinking and dancing and partying, going out to the nightclubs. And one night I had had enough. So doing what I did best, I decided to try to medicate my pain with some drinking. So I was in my parents' home, grabbed a bottle of Seagram's, and just started drinking. And it wasn't working fast enough, so I grabbed a bottle of aspirin out of my parents' cabinet. And all I remember is that I got extremely sick. I remember passing out, and I remember my parents coming home and finding me there. And I'll just never forget the scene in my own mind as I pictured having this out-of-body experience, looking down and seeing myself. And I just remember crying hysterically and saying, "God, please don't let me die. Please don't let me die. If you're there, please don't let me die." I just was so afraid. I'll never forget what happened on one Sunday morning after having a late night out with my friends. I just felt such a sense of emptiness and longing when I woke up on a Sunday morning. And I started driving back west, and something strange happened. I remembered that church that I had visited back in the 1970s, that place that my parents brought me to, a place where I felt safe, even for a moment as a youngster, kind of looking at life differently. And it was as if God took a hold of the steering wheel and began to direct my car directly towards the Elmbrook Church parking lot. Suddenly I found myself walking into the church lobby, entered into the sanctuary, went up into the second floor, and sat in the back pew as far away from people as I could. And something amazing happened. I heard God's voice for the first time. I remember the message. It was on Isaiah chapter 6. The preacher was talking about God's holiness and his call to purity. And it was as if he was speaking directly to me, as if there was nobody else seated in that sanctuary. And God reached me that day. And over the next several weeks and months, I found myself drawn to coming back to Elmbrook. Often I would be out on a Saturday night and I would be back at Elmbrook on a Sunday morning. And the messages began to convict me. And I began to realize that I had a choice to make, that this God apparently had saved me for a reason, and it was now my calling to find out for what I was saved for. We had a guest visitor who came to our class, and he had this testimony that was so powerful about time that he spent in the prisons, and his story just gripped me because I looked at his life and I thought, if God can change someone like that, he can continue changing somebody like me. So we talked afterwards, and our conversation continued into the parking lot. And pretty soon from the parking lot, we were sitting in my car, and we stayed out there for what's been like almost 2 hours, just talking about life, talking about where I'd been, shared my story with him. And the only thing that interrupted our times of talking was the silence and the moments of contemplation that I had when we heard the raindrops falling on the car windows outside. And it was at that moment in the parking lot of Elmbrook Church, sitting side by side with a friend who cared enough to meet with me and hear my heartache and my story, when I bowed my head and gave my life to Christ. When I consider all that God's really done for me, I truly stand amazed at his love, his patience, and his mercy and grace that he's given to me. He's given me the privilege to know him, to serve him, to love him, and to use my gifts to teach about him. All this has shown me that if God can use someone like me, he can use anyone. And that would be my prayer, that people would learn from my story.